Hey guys, Silent here, and I'm going to be talking about Preacher. There will be spoilers for the comic and for the TV show, so if you don't want these things to be spoiled, go away, watch it, read it now, come back later. You still with me? Good. Right, pause the video, go make yourself a coffee, and then we can chat. Remember, this is about Preacher, so the age rating is going to be mature. There's going to be some cussing, spoilers, and more. Right. So, I started reading Preacher in 2001, it should be roughly. I would have been about 17 at the time. And honestly, I loved it. As a teenager, anti-establishment, anti-religion, everything, it just really hit with me. So I've kind of loved the series for a long time, there's no denying that. And I've been aware of the rumours over the past 15 odd years that they were going to be making a TV show or movie, and I never really gave it much credence. But now it's here, and we actually have Preacher being made. And I admit I go into this being really, really cautious. Because when TV shows tend to be made over comic book material, it tends to fall into two camps. Either they change the content so drastically that it's pretty much unrecognisable, I'm looking at you, Lucifer, or they just tend to get cancelled early on. I mean, just bear with me for a second. We've got Lucifer, as I just mentioned, which is your essential existential crisis from the point of view of Lucifer Morningstar. And yet, when they came and made a TV show out of it, they essentially made it into a, weekly procedural crime show with supernatural leanings. Okay, fair enough, but it's not really the source material, is it? And then we've got Constantine, which, admittedly, I don't know much about the Hellblazer comics or Constantine as a character. My first real introduction was reading comics in the library and then the Keanu Reeves movie. But just from what I'm led to understand, the Constantine TV show is a lot kind of closer in accuracy to the comics than most other things. And, that got cancelled after a season. I really quite enjoyed Constantine. I thought it was pretty damn good myself, but that's just me. So we've got those two camps where it either does really well but isn't really the original content, or it just gets cancelled early on and leaves me disappointed and wishing for more. So I go into Preacher thinking, is this actually going to deliver in any way? Then when we look at the casting, my biggest issue with the casting is just Dominic Cooper. I've got no problem with Dominic Cooper himself. But, I can't look at the guy without thinking about Howard Stark. And, that's not the biggest problem. But just to me, Jesse Custer, the preacher in question, he's just like a tall, thin, kind of southerner type. And Dominic Cooper just doesn't bring that to the table. I mean, having watched the pilot now, I'm willing to give Dominic a go. But it just... the promotional material really didn't strike it for me. Okay, so we have Preacher the comic. The core plotline of Preacher the comic is, for reasons we won't discuss, an angel and a demon do it. They give birth to a hybrid, aptly named Genesis, which has divine powers, and essentially breaks out of a heavenly containment. Joins with a preacher, Jesse Custer, who then goes on a quest to make God account for creation. All the while we find out that God himself has fucked off from the throne of heaven, and we don't know what's going on. There you go. That's essentially a condensed version. There's a lot of more subplots and characterizations going on, but that's really condensed. So we've got the TV show. Pilot episode came out last week. That starts off with Genesis starts off like going through space, but comes to Earth looking for a host. Possesses a African preacher who's like spouting some kind of sermon, and then he promptly explodes. This all happens in like the first 2 seconds. And, you know, that made me laugh. It actually had me in hopeful spirits for the show. Just that there. And then, you know, we quickly cut to Jesse, who's failing horribly at being a preacher. He's just not really doing well at all. And in the pilot we also see storylines for Tulip and Cassidy, who are also like... they're also like the main characters in the show, or in the comic. One being a love interest. I won't tell you which, spoilers. But yeah, we kind of see their storylines, but they're being tied in to Jesse too much too early. It's like, yes, Tulip had history with Jesse in the comic, but there's a big part in the comic where Jesse's family catches up with him. It's like, oh yeah, if you don't come back with us, we're going to kill your pretty girlfriend. And he has to abandon her. And then that leads her on to become, you know, a hitman of sorts. That's not really going to spoil things. It gets revealed early on, but, you know, and then Cassidy just kind of looks into things, but in the pilot, he jumps out of a plane and just lands in Annville, Texas. It's like, okay, well, that's fair enough. Now, as for the pilots really kind of... I can understand why they're going to want to build up just how disappointing Jesse is as a man of the faith. So I can understand why they would dedicate the pilot to that. And you're going to be building a lot of extra content there because, you know, in the comic, we get a little bit of failing, then Jesse goes to the bar, gets drunk, and basically calls out the entire town for being shitty. And so everyone goes to church the next Sunday, and it's like, because they want to see if the preacher kind of has another breakdown. And that's the point where Genesis kind of comes in. But in the TV show, Jesse is drunk at the local pub, and he gets attacked by a bunch of locals, and it's like, okay, well, he's just whooped all of their butts, and then the next time we go to his next Sunday sermon, it's like, that's got no bearing whatsoever. The turnout is still abysmally poor, and it doesn't kind of tie in with the origin in the comic, which will be important in just a second. Now, one of the comments that I've seen about the pilot is that we've got one of the parishioners who's kind of romanticising abuse, much like 50 Shades of Grey does. Although it's physical as opposed to emotional abuse here. And she turns around to Jesse and she's like, oh yeah, I essentially says I get off on my abusive husband. And, you know, I don't mind that. I will let that slide. It's not kind of from the comic at all, but I'll let that slide because, you know, it does show that Jesse as a person is out of touch with his parishioners as much as he may be with his religion. So, you know, that's fine. That's allowed to be kind of there. And as a plot point, it gives the confrontation in the pub, which is where the disappointment sets in. After that confrontation, Jesse gets arrested, ends up going to getting bailed the same night, goes to church, gets possessed by Genesis there and then, wakes up 3 days later having been running a fever, and, you know, everyone's like, oh yeah, we decided not to cancel service because your temperature came down. Dude's been unconscious for 3 days. He has no preparation whatsoever. What, you think he just pulls a sermon out of his butt? I mean, granted, you probably could. I'm reading this out of thin air, but, you know, you gotta have more faith in your preacher than, well, just making shit up as he goes along. That doesn't really make sense unless someone's writing him a sermon there and then. Now, when we compare this to the comic, Jesse gets to the sermon, and he's like, oh my god, everyone's here. They just want to see me crack out again. That's the moment that Genesis comes in. They bond. huge explosion, everyone dies. That is like a monumental piece in the comic, because it really sets forth like Jesse's adventure. It's like, oh shit, I can now like hear this divine being in my head saying that God's abandoned heaven. Shit, I've got to go find God and make him accountable for everything. And that's kind of what happens. I probably see kind of the entire bonding of Genesis from a entirely different perspective as other people. I've seen several kind of theories about that online over the years, but to me, it's all about Jesse's real lack of faith. He's doing this as a job, he doesn't necessarily believe it. And you've got Genesis, a being who is divine and demonic, who really is questioning himself as much as creation, finds a being who is questioning everything. It's like, okay, we'll go together. Whereas in the TV show, Genesis like tries bonding with a bunch of people. We don't really see why. Starts off with the preacher in Africa, then some demonic cult leader in Russia, and then Tom Cruise in the Scientology building. Each of them exploding. You don't really get an explanation why. But then when it comes to bonding with Jesse, it's like, okay, well, this is fine. And Jesse's standing there at the pulpit, and he's like, I was going to quit, but now I'm just going to be the best damn preacher that I can be. Yeah, boy! It doesn't really make sense, and it doesn't tie into the comic whatsoever. That is a complete reversal of what would happen in the comic. It's like, what the shit? Now, as I say, I know that you're going to have to change a comic significantly when it becomes a audio-visual medium like a TV show or movie. I don't expect 100% translation. But you had no reason to introduce that moment. You should still have the big explosion, and I just don't get why they didn't. Seriously. What is the point there? But, yeah, it just kind of left the pilots with an underwhelming feeling, as if there just wasn't any purpose to it. I saw a thing mentioning that the first season of Preacher is going to take place in Anvil. What? No, what? How? What? It should already be on the road by the end of the pilot. They're bonded, should have exploded the church, should have told Sheriff Root to go fuck himself, and then, bam. But I'm just starting to feel... As I say, my two concerns with Preacher are signified by what happened with Lucifer, what happened with Constantine. One got cancelled, one got changed a lot. And what I've seen in the pilot episode just doesn't reassure me that they're not going to change it beyond recognition. I've got no reason to believe that this isn't just going to be a huge change and things are just going to be different. It's not necessarily going to be Preacher if they do that. And when I turn around and see that happen anytime, it really disappoints me, because by doing a shitty translation of anything, a bad adaptation, you're stopping someone else making a good adaptation. Because you've done a terrible version of whatever. So nobody's going to turn around and think, I can do that better. People aren't going to think this was the reason. The money men for Hollywood, for TV, they don't look at whether or not it was an accurate adaptation. They just look at, well, someone made Preacher, it didn't do very well, I'm not going to bother. There's no reason to try and do a different version. So my hopes of having a decent adaptation of Preacher seem to be dwindling. Now, I am going to be watching the next couple of episodes because I really hope that it's going to change my mind. But we've had so many changes already that I just don't hold out the faith any longer. Someone turned around and said to me that we may have not had the explosion of the church, but we had exploding holy men across the world. We saw that once, and it really didn't kind of have the same impact. It was funny, but it's not the same as that dramatic moment where, Jesse's essentially got to go on the run for his life because everything's just burnt down around him. He's walked out unharmed. Nobody's going to believe him that it wasn't him, especially with how he was acting the night before. But as I'm watching the pilot, I see Tulip, I see Sheriff Root, I see Arseface. Yes, there is a guy called Arseface. I see Cassidy all sitting in the church. I'm like, there's no way in hell that's going to burn. There's just... what? And I just know. I'm just already starting to get disappointed. I'll give it a try, but it's just so much has changed. It's already leaving me with a bad taste in my mouth. Anyway, what do you guys think? Do you know the comic? Have you just come into it with the TV show? Are you a fan of Preacher? Let me know below. Tell me what you think of the pilot. How does it compare? If you've come into it from the TV show, go find yourself a copy of the comic. Read it now. Read Gone to Texas, the first graphic novel, and let me know how that compares. How, seeing that as the second medium compares having seen the pilot. But anyway, I've been silent. You've been the audience. We've been talking about Preacher. Follow me on Twitter for updates. Subscribe to the channel to see if I rant about Preacher again in the future. I probably will. And if you want to see more of me, you can see my pretty face on Twitch. There should be a link in the description below. You can see me stream games at least twice a week, maybe more. Take care, and remember, it's a cold, hard world out there, and Preacher isn't making it any better for us. Take care now. Take care now. Take care now.